Rupert Lowe is interviewed by Nick Robinson of BBC Radio 4, and they sit down, they have a conversation, and it makes for quite a good interview, right? Because Nick Robinson, he challenges Rupert Lowe, and he doesn't really get much of a response because Lowe is not answering the questions. He's just completely spewing his rubbish. He's used to sitting down with people that agree with him. So when he sits down with someone that disagrees with him, by any metric, right? By any metric, Lowe is completely destroyed here. Because the thing is that if you're not willing to answer the questions, you already lost, right? You're not even willing to answer the questions. So he can try and hide behind, oh, you're the BBC and so on and so forth. Yeah, I mean, public opinion, from a public opinion angle, BBC is not liked in this country. The BBC is not liked whatsoever. But you can't hide behind that, right? You have to at least have the conversation. If you've agreed to an interview, you can't just say, I'm not going to answer the questions. Nick Robinson starts the conversation off by saying, by asking, what is Restore Britain? What does Restore Britain mean, right? And, Lowe, it's probably the only question he answers, but he says that, look, Restore Britain, we're a party, we want to sort of restore Britain to its former glory days where we had a low national debt, where we had, we didn't have crime, and it was a safe society, high trust society. And, I mean, who can't get behind that, There's no reasonable person that will disagree with any of that. But that's not what the party is. The party is sort of a single issue party. It's sort of made its whole thing, its whole shtick is just immigration, right? And Muslims, to be honest with you. So what does he do? Basically, that's all they speak about during the entirety of the interview. I know Lowe says he wants to discuss his economic paper, but instead, what does he do? Robinson asks him, we're sort of, you're saying that we're hurtling towards, becoming an Islamic country, right? What do you mean by that, right? What's your evidence for that? Because we know, right, any reasonable person knows that Muslims make up what? A few million in the United Kingdom. Pakistanis, they like to talk about Pakistanis, they make up 2.7% of the United Kingdom, right? And apparently Pakistanis are invading the UK. They're not even 3% of the population. We like to clown Marlon West, right? And how poorly he did in the Manchester mayoral by-election, couldn't even get 8.7% of the vote, but at least that's still higher than the Pakistani population, right? So that's another lie he says. Marlon West did brilliantly. Marlon West did terribly. Let's just not, there's no beating around the bush to be done here. Marlon West couldn't even get 10% of the vote. And in fact, for all this begging that Lowe is doing for Farage's help, even when you combine the restore number, the reform number, it's still not even 30%, right? I think Labour got 43 or 47% of the vote. So it's still nowhere near Labour's share. I'm not a Labour guy myself, but, these are points that need to be made, right? Because you can say what you want. You can describe your party however you want. But, you're only going to be able to implement any of this. And even if you do get into power, you're going to have to appease, the electorate, because as much as many of you may think on the right that the whole country's like this, it's not true. For you to get elected, you're going to have to move closer to the centre, just like Farage is doing. Farage is smart enough to know this because he's been in politics long enough. But Lowe himself thinks that, Twitter is going to get him elected as Prime Minister. I don't know if he actually believes this or he thinks it's sort of his last hope now that he's out of reform. But you can't win an election through Twitter, right? We saw this time and time again. We've said this about James Fishback in Florida. We saw this with Thomas Massey, albeit I quite like him, but we saw this with Thomas Massey in Kentucky in the United States. And we see it time and time again during every single election, right? Even a Corbyn will move closer to the centre. A Zohran Mamdani in New York will move closer to the centre, right? Abdul El Sayed in Michigan, who just got elected. You don't think he's going to move closer to the centre the closer they get to the primary in November? So it's either that Lowe doesn't understand politics or he knows that we're still too far out from an election to move closer to the centre. But, he has this conversation. They also discuss the rape gang inquiry report, which we've debunked on the show before. The 250,000 number is completely fake, and really Robinson should have read this report, because he says, I haven't read the report. You should read the report, and I encourage everyone to read the report, right? As a Muslim, I say to my Muslim friends, read the report. The 219-page report, read it. Why? Because when you read it, and you look at the numbers, and you see that they don't go anywhere, right? And you see that they're not backed up by anything, and you see that this 250,000 peddled by Lowe and peddled by even Elon, the richest man in the world, you will see that this number's completely bogus. It's not real. It is an estimate. It's not a real number. The real number is actually 3,073, okay? From 3 areas, from Rotherham, from Telford, and from Oxford, okay? So it's a fake number. We've actually got the numbers, right? But they don't want to talk about the actual numbers, the child sexual exploitation numbers. We have the data, and we can see that, like we've just said, Pakistanis make up 2.7% of the population, and yet they make up 2.2% of child sexual exploitation, right? They make up 2.2%, right? 0.5% less than their population size. So they are underrepresented. The white British, they make up 83% of the population, and yet they make up, I believe, 85 to 88% of child sexual exploitation cases. This doesn't even need to be said. You come up to someone in the street and you say, who's committing the majority of rape and of sexual assault, child sexual exploitation, gang rape? 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10 times, they'll come back and they'll say, that'll be the white majority, right? And even size to ratio, right? Even per capita, we can see the child sexual exploitation tells us that Pakistanis are underrepresented, and it tells us that the white British are overrepresented. So it's complete projection. They're just projecting it on us, right? To make themselves feel better. But you need to sort out your own problems in your own communities before coming to us, right? Because our people, what are we doing? We're going to university, we're becoming educated, we're becoming lawyers, and we're becoming doctors, right? We're becoming engineers, we're studying, we're benefiting the country, paying taxes, right? While you guys are falling behind. So and you've always got to blame someone, right? PRS, problem, reaction, solution. Rupert Lowe is a genius at this. And we'll see what happens, right, with his next interview. But you can be certain that we'll discuss it and we'll debunk it, right? Because his whole platform is completely held up by lies, just complete lies, right? And the fools that are falling for it. The last thing I want to say here, Nick Robinson questions Rupert Lowe and says, you've got this report that states that white Britons will become a minority by 2063. Within the definition of this report, 54-page report by Matt Goodwin, Professor Matt Goodwin, who I believe is actually at Reform, but nevertheless, he says, you've got this 54-page report, and it says that white Britons will become a minority by 2063, but it defines white Britons as their parents, both their parents have been born here, right? And Rupert Lowe says, well, look, I subscribe to that belief. I think that white Britons will become a minority by 2063. And Nick Robinson says, well, by that definition, King Charles III, the king of this country, would not be considered a white Briton because Philip was born in Greece. And Lowe is like, the fact that you can't just say, look, King Charles III is a white Briton. He can't even, I don't know if he thinks his base is going to disavow him if he says that Charles III isn't a white Briton. But if he's saying, both my parents are born here. Does that, a Muslim guy, I'm more white, I'm more British than King Charles III. Yo, these are the types of people we're dealing with, right? I thought Lowe was supposed to be an educated guy. He went to university, no? So, you know, I thought he was supposed to be a step up from his supporters, but turns out that's not the case. But that, I mean, we'll leave it on that, right? Because it's just complete bogus. But yeah, complete. They call it a masterclass, disaster class. This interview was complete car crash of an interview. But it's expected to see from someone like Rupert Lowe, right? How low can he go? We'll see. We'll see.